What historical fact you find insane is not commonly known. Between 1864 and 1870, Paraguay fought a war with Brazil, Uruguay and Argentina, that by some estimates killed as much as 70% of its population, with up to 90% of its adult male population dying or fleeing the country. Abraham Lincoln's son Robert Todd Lincoln was present at 3 different presidential assassinations. After McKinley, he decided not to accept any more invitations. Robert Lincoln was also once saved on a train platform by John Wilkes Booth's older brother Edwin, also a famous actor of the time. That's not all. Robert Todd Lincoln also dated, even if back in that time you wouldn't have used this term, Lucy Lambert Hale, who was a popular beauty of her time in Washington, D.C. They never officially got together, but remained good friends. By early 1865, she was often seen together in public with another man, one she was clandestinely engaged with. On March 4, 1865, the couple attended Lincoln's second presidential inauguration with a ticket that Lucy had procured through her father, a prominent U.S. senator. Now, you wouldn't guess the name of Hale's fiancé, John Wilkes Booth. Yeah, that guy. A very recent historical fact that is weirdly not talked about as much as it should be. Microsoft had accumulated such a big monopoly over the personal computer market through the 80s and 90s that in 1997 Microsoft was nearly broken apart by the US government. In an attempt to avoid an investigation, Microsoft invested nearly $150 million into a then-failing Apple computer to give the US government less ammunition in a potential antitrust case. This saved Apple from bankruptcy and helped them to become one of the biggest tech companies in history. Microsoft, however, profited off of this investment. In 2003, Microsoft sold their shares in Apple for nearly $600 million. Imagine how much wealthier Microsoft would be if they held on to those shares longer. iPhones were just a few years away. For people in the UK, it's that blackcurrants and blackcurrant flavor are largely unknown. In the USA, in the UK, everything purple is blackcurrant flavored, not grape. The reason is blackcurrants carry a fungus that is lethal to white pine, which is one of the US's top timber exports. My wife is American and moved to the UK just under a year ago. She's been wondering why we have blackcurrant everything and she's never heard of it before. Ancient Romans would put sandals in the hands of sleeping people, then tickled their face so they would slap themselves. The Pony Express lasted only a year and a half. Portugal had a deaf queen, and it is an insane real love story. If you like Romeo and Juliet, search for the story of Dom Pedro and Dona Inês for the real-life version of it. Long story short, Dom Pedro was first in line to be the next king of Portugal, so his father, the king, arranged a marriage suited for his position with a Spanish noble lady. That the future king fell in love with one of the ladies in waiting of his bride, Dona Inês. They got married in secret and had a bunch of kids. The king didn't like that and sent his knights to kill her. Dom Pedro went batshit crazy, found the knights and killed them, and ripped of the heart of one of the knights. Then he got the corpse of Dona Inês, put it on the throne, and made the nobles pay allegiance to her by kissing her hand. He still became king in the end. There is a lot more to this story, but all of it is crazy but true facts. Portuguese royals' history is full of stuff that could be part of Game of Thrones. More people died during the production of the Vita rocket than were killed by it as a weapon of war. Edit. Accuracy. I know the conditions were atrocious and calling them brutally inhumane would be an understatement, but this was also because a Spanish guy codenamed Garbo had offered to spy for the Nazis and immediately turned on them. And part of that was giving them incorrect information about where the Vita South were landing, saying they were landing more south, and they did so. The Vita launchers kept aiming them farther and farther north of London, where they'd land in much less densely populated areas. Garbo's one of the greatest double agents in history. He'd seen what the fascists did in Spain. So when WW2 broke out, he tried to offer his services to the British. The British turned him down on the grounds that he was, well, just some guy. So he decided screw it, he'd do it himself. So he convinces the Germans he's living in Britain and has a small network of loyal agents working for him, and starts sending them false information. The Germans somehow believe this despite him actually living in Portugal and relying entirely on a tourist guide to London for details to include in his reports. He becomes so trusted that the Germans stop trying to set up any more spy networks in Britain, and eventually convinces the British to hire him as a genuine agent. Dadas. During the Irish famine, the Choctaw Nation from the USA sent financial aid to them, and, while a small amount at the time, it was seen as a great gesture. In return, during COVID, many Irish people donated money to the Navajo Nation to help them. There's a statue in County Cork to commemorate it as well. Reminds me of the Maasai tribe donating 14 cows to the US after 9/11's. Assistance in a time of need is always a beautiful gift worthy of remembering. Humans developed agriculture around 12,000 years ago. By storing grain, huge numbers of rodents flourished. Cats showed up to eat the rodents, and humans learned that if they took care of the cats would control the rodents. Therefore, it was the invention of agriculture that led to the domestication of the house cat. It gets even weirder. Cats basically domesticated themselves because natural selection favored those individuals that were brave enough to associate with humans and get all those tasty rodents. The Canadian-Denmark Whiskey War was probably the most polite war ever. It involved a small island off the coast of Greenland. The Canadians claimed it by putting the Canadian flag and bottles of Canadian whiskey on the rock, and the Danes would replace it with schnapps and the Danish flag. Both sides reached an agreement to split the island in 2022. I'm guessing this is more well known to Canadians and Danes than some of the rest of us. No one ever believes me when I tell them that Canada and Denmark border each other. From the 1930s to the 1970s, approximately one-third of Puerto Rico's female population underwent sterilization. Mongolian invasion of Japan was stopped by a typhoon. When they tried again, they were stopped by another typhoon. To this day, these were the only 2 typhoons recorded in that place. The Netherlands sends Canada 20,000 tulips every year for liberating them during Second World War. The Netherlands also has a cemetery dedicated to Canadian fallen troops. Canada gave refuge to the Dutch royal family during the war, and Princess Margriet was born in the Ottawa Civic Hospital. That hospital was temporarily declared to be extraterritorial by the Canadian government, so she would not be born in Canada. Therefore, she is not a Canadian citizen and retained her eligibility to inherit the Dutch throne. These type of nice gestures remind me that most rules and laws are just fucking made up, and we can do whatever the fuck we want, even be nice. During Prohibition, grape concentrate bricks called Vintlo were sold. On the packaging, it included a very specific warning. After dissolving the brick in a gallon of water, do not place the liquid in a jug away in the cupboard for 20 days, because then it would turn into wine. Coca-Cola still uses coca leaves in their formula, just for the flavor. They are the only US company that is legally allowed to import coca leaves. The processed leaves are then sold to a pharmaceutical company. Technically, it isn't Coca-Cola but rather a third party that imports the coca leaves, the Stepan Company plant in Maywood, New Jersey. They process the leaves and use the cocaine for medical purposes and the extract for Coca-Cola. The magician Harry Houdini hated people who claimed to be psychics and clairvoyants so much that he once testified before Congress in an attempt to give fortune readings and things like that made illegal. We have historic proof of the Lewis and Clark expedition because they took with them mercury pills. The mercury passed through their digestive tract, and we've run into mercury deposits. Another Lewis and Clark fact: their principal weapon was a compressed air gun. They chose it as it would be seen as less threatening by the Native Americans they came across along the journey, and wouldn't require expensive gunpowder to use. Yes, these guys airsofted their way across North America. The Chinese sparrow hunt in 1960. It was to protect crops, but it allowed invasions of locusts that no longer had a predator, and this caused the Great Chinese Famine. The Statue of Liberty, is a monument to the abolition of slavery, which is why there is a set of broken chains hidden near her feet. The reason we have coal is because trees weren't biodegradable back then, so it just underwent the geological process and formed underground, under pressure, and high temperatures. The fungus that breaks down trees only evolved 40 million years ago. Humanity was likely nearly wiped out about 900,000 years ago, and our ancestors were reduced to about 1280 breeding individuals and stayed around that many for 117,000 years. Like the article mentioned, it's amazing that this tribe of 1280 people managed to live and reproduce for 117,000 years without anything wiping them out. Gotta hand it to 'em for that. Antarctica wasn't officially confirmed as a continent until 1820, meaning that humans confirmed Uranus as a planet 40 years before Antarctica was confirmed as a continent. A drunk driver wrecked a car into the most isolated tree in the world in the Sahara Desert in the 70s, killing it. Thomas Jefferson created his own version of the Bible, a hand that removed the whole First Testament and any and all mentions and references to miracles and the supernatural. It's called the Jefferson Bible and you can still get them. In the 1920s, Liberia had a general election, which the True Whig Party won with 243,000 votes. There were 15,000 registered voters for the election. When there are talks about colonization, the countries that always come to mind are England, Spain and France. It's pretty weird for me that most people forget the Netherlands and Portugal, as they both had very impactful colonies around the world. I could understand if the case was that people would refer first to the oldest ones, but if that was the case, the Portuguese colonies should be referred as well, as they go as far back as the 1500s. It's wild to me about how history has sort of just glossed over how impactful the Portuguese were in shipbuilding, innovation and sea exploration in general. The Dutch were by far and large the worst aggressors in the slave trade. The fact that the Dutch army was massacring entire villages in Africa well into the late 1940s seems to go unnoticed as well. Apparently, the wooden shoes and windmills are a better selling point than the genocide of literally millions of Africans. The Supreme Court decided that tomatoes are a vegetable, not a fruit in 1893. That was only for import. Export tax purposes though, right? Vegetables is just a culinary term though, not a botanical term. On property owned by a Mr. Wilbur McLean, the American Civil War's first engagement took place. In order to escape the war, he made the decision to relocate farther out into the countryside following the fight. 4 years later, General Lee turned himself into General Grant at Mr. McLean's home. That was his land, where the fight began and finished. After World War I, there was a group of Jewish assassins called the Avengers who hunted Nazi war criminals. They were responsible for poisoning 283 German prisoners of war that American orphanages used to trick vulnerable mothers into signing away custody of their children, then sell those babies to wealthy families. Many babies die, etc. The late Queen of England had two mentally disabled cousins who were abandoned in a mental hospital, which was literally once called the Asylum for Idiots and never claimed as part of the family. And they were even listed as dead for 47 and 26 years, respectively, before the truth came out. George V was euthanized against his will because they thought it was more dignified to have his death reported in the morning news than the evening. In medieval Germany, it was common for priests and nuns to literally enter symbolic marriages to Jesus, and numerous religious books from the era mentioned the wedding nights. There was a species of tortoise on the Galapagos that was never fully catalogued at the time of Darwin's expedition because it was so delicious no specimens made it back to the UK. Cracker, when used as a slur for white people, doesn't refer to the food. It refers to a slave owner cracking his whip. Oh my god, this is the one that's blown my mind the most. So obvious, but I just didn't realize. Morocco was the first country to recognize the United States as America as an independent country. During Second World War, the USA produced so many Purple Hearts, anticipating heavy losses in taking mainland Japan, that the surplus is still being used. Pink was originally considered a masculine color and was only popularized as a feminine color in the 1940s. More than half the people who have ever died, almost 50 billion, are thought to have died from female mosquito bites. The Great Emu War in Australia 1932. Soldiers armed with machine guns fought emus to protect crops. The emus won. That the Soviet Union had female snipers during World War II. I grew up hearing no women fought in World War II and that the only women who didn't stay home were nurses. Those women took out so many Nazis. They had kill counts. They were heroes. Did you know Cleopatra lived closer in time to the moon landing than to the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza? It's wild how much history separates those events. Medieval Europeans believed that redheads were conceived during menstruation. The Dutch had a speculative bubble over tulips. New York was a walled city. The wall used to be where Wall Street now is. Thanks for watching. Share your stories in the comments.